A dying pup, the desert heat, and vultures closing in. That should have been the end, until a stranger pulled over. And what happened next was something no one could have imagined. Where the light found us. Out in the quiet bones of Arizona, where the desert breathes in silence and the wind remembers everything, a dog once lay dying beneath a vulture's gaze. He had no name, no collar. No reason left to hold one, except that something inside him refused to let go. And just a few miles down the same forgotten road, a man drove with ghosts in his rearview mirror. A man who had seen too much, felt too little, and told himself that solitude was safer than sorrow. Neither of them was looking to be saved. But fate doesn't always knock at waits in the dust, in the howl of distant thunder. In the moment a man pulls over and decides not to keep driving. And from that single moment, everything began to change. This is the story of a broken dog and a battle-worn soul, of a girl who hadn't spoken in 2 years, and of how one heartbeat, once nearly lost, became the light that led them all home. Tucson, Arizona baked under the weight of another July afternoon. The sun, merciless and unsympathetic, hung above the desert like a suspended coin of fire, bleaching the sky to a flat, aching white. The horizon shimmered in waves, turning everything in the distance into a mirage. Along the cracked edge of Highway 286, far from any shade or sign of life, the silence was thick enough to crush a whisper. And yet, there was a sound of faint, rasping breath, almost drowned by the dry wind scraping across the sand. Noah Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his aging Ford Bronco as it bounced over another patch of uneven road. The AC groaned but blew little more than warm air. He didn't mind. He was used to heat, had lived through far worse in Kandahar and Fallujah. The war hadn't left scars on his skin, but the silence of it, the kind that came after explosions, the way time froze when you were the last one standing, that silence had followed him home. Noah was 38, tall and broad-shouldered with a square jaw, sun-worn skin, and eyes the color of dried tobacco leaves. His short-cropped hair was peppered with gray, and his hands bore the quiet tremor of a man who still woke up sometimes reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. After 12 years of service in the Marines, he now lived alone on the outskirts of Green Valley, south of Tucson, where the cactus grew taller than men and the nights echoed with the cries of coyotes. He hadn't planned to take this road today. He was coming back from picking up a part for his generator and chose the long way home. Maybe to avoid the highway, maybe to avoid people. As he crested a rise in the road, something caught his eye. A black smear against the pale tan earth, surrounded by flickering movement. At first, he thought it was trash, maybe roadkill. But then he saw them. Vultures. 5 of them. One perched on a nearby fence post, the others on the ground, stepping closer in a slow, sinister dance. Noah's heart clenched. He slammed the brake and jerked the wheel to the side, gravel flying beneath the tires as the Bronco skidded to a halt. Dust bloomed around him as he jumped out, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He moved quickly, instinctively, grabbing the tire iron from behind his seat as he approached. The birds turned to face him, unbothered. One hissed. Another flapped its wings but didn't fly. They knew their prize was close. Noah stepped forward, swinging the iron. "Get!" he barked, and the vultures, annoyed, finally scattered into the sky. And then he saw it. The dog lay motionless on the shoulder of the road, half-curled, ribs poking through sunburned fur the color of worn sand. It was a Labrador young, maybe 3 or 4 months old, but so underweight it looked skeletal. Flies hovered around the corners of its cracked lips. Its breathing was shallow, barely there. Noah dropped to his knees beside the animal, its eyes open slightly, just slivers of brown glass, unfocused. A faint, involuntary twitch ran through its leg. "You're not dead yet," Noah whispered. He slid his arms under the pup carefully, lifting it with both gentleness and urgency. Its body was hot, not with health, but with the fever of dehydration. He carried it back to the Bronco, placing it on the passenger seat, and tilted the only working AC vent toward it. He unscrewed the cap of his water bottle and tried to dribble a little onto the cracked tongue. The pup didn't react. "No, no, come on," he murmured. "Don't quit now." There were no clinics nearby. Noah knew this stretch of road, but about 40 miles north, in the small town of Amado, there was a veterinary office run by a woman he'd met once before, Dr. Elaine Foster. She'd treated a neighbor's injured dog last year. Mid-40s, auburn hair usually tied in a bun, sharp features softened by a quiet compassion. Elaine wasn't much for small talk, but had the kind of presence that made animals trust her instantly. Noah hoped to God she was still there. He started the engine and peeled off, wheels kicking up dust as he sped north. His gaze flicked between the road and the fragile creature beside him. "I don't even know your name," he said aloud. "But you're going to make it. You hear me?" The dog didn't move. 15 minutes into the drive, he glanced down and noticed something faint on the pup's inner thigh, a faded mark. Tattooed numbers, small, discreet. Recognition sank into Noah's gut like a rock. Military. He'd seen it before, during joint canine operations overseas. Identification numbers used in special breeding programs. So this wasn't just any dog. Noah's hands tightened on the wheel. Someone had bred this pup for service, maybe even combat, and now it was dying on the side of a forgotten road, surrounded by vultures. He drove faster. The world outside blurred in waves of sun and sand, but all he saw was the rise and fall of that tiny chest beside him. He didn't know why he cared so much, but he did. He cared like this dog was already part of him. Like maybe this wasn't the pup who needed saving. Maybe it was him. The blast of cold air that greeted Noah Carter as he pushed through the glass doors of Amado Veterinary Care did little to slow the pounding of his heart. His arms tightened around the Labrador pup, whose limp body was swaddled in the faded green flannel he'd kept in the Bronco since winter. The dog hadn't moved, not even a twitch, during the entire drive from the desert. Noah had driven fast, but not recklessly. He couldn't afford to crash with something so fragile beside him. The clinic was small but well kept, its clean beige tiles and wall murals of desert wildlife giving it a warm, unassuming charm. Behind the front desk sat a young woman with a blonde ponytail, pale freckles scattered across her nose, like someone had dusted her face with cinnamon. She was petite, no older than 25, with a nervous but competent energy. Her name tag read Amber. She looked up from her computer and froze the moment she saw what Noah was carrying. "Oh God," she breathed. "Room 3. Now, I'll get Dr. Foster." Noah followed the quick rhythm of her sneakers down the hall, stepping into a narrow exam room with a window that let in dusty sunlight filtered through a torn roller blind. He gently laid the dog down on the table, careful to keep his hands under its head until it rested flat on the towel-covered surface. The pup's eyes remained closed. Its breathing came in shallow waves, and its chest trembled with every exhale. Within seconds, the door opened again, and Dr. Elaine Foster entered. She was a lean woman in her late 40s, with weathered hands and a face that held equal parts authority and empathy. Her auburn hair was pinned back loosely, strands escaping at her temples. She had intelligent hazel eyes, framed by fine crow's feet signs of someone who'd spent decades squinting into discomfort, tragedy, and possibility. Elaine didn't ask questions. She moved straight to the dog, examining his pulse, gums, and limbs with the practiced movements of someone who knew what every second could mean. "How long's he been like this?" she asked, her voice calm, clipped. "Found him maybe 40 minutes ago. Side of the highway, west of the Kit Peak turnoff. Vultures already closing in, Noah replied. Elaine nodded, turning her attention to the pup's hind leg where something had caught her eye. She tilted the limb slightly, exposing the inside thigh. There, under the layer of matted fur and grime, was a small, faded tattoo almost lost in the dog's pale yellow coat. It was a short alphanumeric code, partially smudged, but still legible to trained eyes. Elaine's brows knit. This isn't a shelter tag. This is military. Noah stepped closer, squinting. I thought so too. Canine code? Looks like it. Not recent, though. Probably one of the defunded programs out of Fort Polk or Lackland. You said you found him just out there? No collar? Nothing. Just lying there like he'd been dumped. Elaine exhaled through her nose. And judging by his vitals, it happened days ago. Maybe longer. He's severely dehydrated. Ribs like razors. Old bruising along the flanks. God knows what he's been through. Amber returned with a tray of supplies, and Elaine quickly began inserting an IV into the pup's front leg. He's critical, she said. But not gone. If you hadn't shown up when you did. She didn't finish the sentence. For the next hour, Noah sat in the far corner of the room as Elaine worked with steady hands. She moved like a battlefield medisufficient, focused, but not cold. She murmured encouragement under her breath, as if speaking to both herself and the animal. Come on, buddy, you're in good hands now. At some point, Noah realized his own hands were shaking, not with fear but something older grief, maybe, or recognition. He'd seen this same flicker of life hanging on by threads during deployment. The way some people clung to breath like it meant something more than survival. He hadn't expected to feel that again, least of all from a half-dead puppy. You're military? Elaine asked over her shoulder without looking at him. Retired, Noah said. Recon, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. She nodded slowly. You're not the first to bring a broken thing through that door. Noah studied her profile-sharp cheekbones, a scar near her chin, the kind that was likely earned, not accidental. You? He asked. Used to run a livestock rescue in Oklahoma. Tornado took most of it out. Husband didn't stay long after that. I came here to rebuild. Noah didn't press further. That was enough. The silence between them, strangely, was not uncomfortable. As the IV dripped and the monitors hummed, Elaine finally stepped back and let her hands fall to her sides. Now we wait, she said. The next few hours will tell us everything. If he makes it through the night, he's got a chance. Noah rose slowly and stepped beside the table. The dog's breathing had steadied slightly. Its limbs were still limp, but the tremors had quieted. Noah reached down, brushing dirt gently from the fur around the pup's ear. He needs a name, Elaine said, leaning against the counter. Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Chance. Elaine raised an eyebrow. That what he gets? That's what he is, Noah replied. She smiled faintly. Fitting. As the afternoon light shifted across the clinic floor, Noah pulled up a stool and sat beside the table, watching over the Labrador now known as Chance. He didn't know what made him care so much. But the knot in his chest, the one he'd carried since he left the military, loosened, just a little. The night settled over Amado like a blanket woven from ash and stillness. The sky outside the clinic was dusted with stars, but inside room 3, the only illumination came from the soft blue glow of the heart monitor and the muted amber of the heating lamp. Noah Carter hadn't moved from the stool beside the examination table since late afternoon. His flannel shirt, now draped over his lap, had dried from the sweat and grit of the day. His boots were still caked with roadside dust. He hadn't eaten, hadn't checked his phone. Every few minutes, his gaze drifted toward the motionless form of the yellow pup lying on a soft towel, wrapped in a thin blanket. With an IV in his leg and a shallow rise and fall in his chest that barely qualified as breath. Dr. Elaine Foster had checked in twice since the sun had gone down. Her instructions were clear. Stay quiet, keep him warm, monitor his pulse. She offered to let Noah use the break room to rest, but he declined. There were beds he could fall asleep in, but not tonight. Something about the dog's stillness mirrored the quiet places inside Noah he rarely dared to sit with. Sometime near 3 a.m., the pup stirred. It was subtle at first. A twitch in the hind leg, a flicker beneath the eyelid. Then, slowly, almost unwillingly, his eyes opened. Not wide just enough for Noah to see a sliver of life. Dull brown eyes, cloudy but conscious, blinked once, then fixed on the nearest thing. Him. Noah leaned forward. "Hey there," he whispered, unsure of why his voice caught in his throat. "You with me?" The pup didn't move much. He didn't whimper. But his nose twitched faintly, catching the scent of the man who had held him when the world was fading. Noah reached out and gently stroked the soft fur behind his ear. "You made it," he murmured. "Tough little guy." The pup blinked again, and for the first time, there was something behind those eyes a-flicker, like a match struck in the dark. Not fear, not yet trust either, but awareness. Noah's chest tightened. "You need a name," he said quietly. "Can't keep calling you pup." He thought of the desert, of the vultures, of the tattoo no one had expected to see, of the fact that somehow, against odds, this broken, discarded creature had held on. Maybe out of instinct, maybe out of defiance. "Chance," he said. "Your name's Chance." The dog's eyes flicked toward him again, as if registering the word, Chance. A few minutes later, Elaine returned. She wore a black hoodie over her scrubs and carried 2 steaming cups of instant coffee. She handed one to Noah without a word, then walked over to examine the pup. Her movements were slow and careful, more relaxed than earlier, but still sharp with purpose. "He's alert," she said, her voice edged with cautious relief. "Color's still off, but his breathing's more stable. This is a good sign." "He looked at me," Noah said. "Just for a second, like he knew where he was." Elaine smiled faintly and wrote something down on the chart. "They always know more than we give them credit for." Noah took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, but he didn't care. "You get many like him?" he asked. Elaine shook her head. "Not many this bad, not with a military code and no records. That part's strange. I've worked with retired service dogs before. There's always paperwork. If this one was officially discharged, I'd have a trail. But I've found nothing." "Could he have been dumped?" Noah asked. Elaine looked up, her expression grave. "It's possible, especially if he failed early assessments. There are breeder-son official contractors who work with defense programs. Sometimes they cull pups who don't meet standards. That tattoo looks like it was done too young, probably before he was even evaluated." "Jesus," Noah muttered. "People forget," she continued, "that 9 dogs are bred to be tools before they're treated like lives. If they don't show aggression or tracking skills early enough, they're considered defective. You'd be surprised how often defective ends up meaning disposable." Noah didn't respond. His mind was already turning. The faded tattoo, the condition Chance had been in, the fact that there had been no collar, no microchip. Someone had tried to erase him. They both sat in silence for a while. Eventually, Elaine stood. "Let him rest. He'll need small feedings once he wakes properly. I'll prep a nutrient mix. You staying?" Noah nodded. "Yeah." She looked at him a beat longer, then said, "There's an old army cot in the storage room if you need it." After she left, Noah turned his chair so he could rest his arms on the edge of the table. Chance hadn't moved again, but his breathing was deeper now, stronger. That, for now, was enough. At sunrise, light spilled into the room in bands of gold and gray. Outside, a rooster crowed from somewhere across the field. Noah dozed in his chair, one hand still resting on the table. At some point, Chance shifted, the movement drawing Noah's eyes open. The pup blinked slowly, then almost imperceptibly. His paw lifted an inch off the towel and rested lightly against Noah's wrist. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of quiet routine and restless nights. Chance remained at the clinic under Elaine's watchful care, slowly gaining strength through regular IV fluids, soft feedings, and warm blankets. Noah visited every morning and evening, often staying for hours, sitting quietly by the recovery table. The bond between man and dog had grown silently, without ceremony. Neither demanded anything of the other, and yet something unspoken passed between them every time their eyes met. But as Chance's body began to heal, something inside Noah began to unravel. Sleep came only in fragments. The few hours he managed to grab were restless and shallow, riddled with visions he had spent years trying to suppress. Explosions lighting up desert skies, screams, the smell of blood and burning sand, and faces of those who didn't back. One night, after returning from the clinic, Noah sat on the edge of his bed in the small adobe rental he called home. The place was modest bare walls, a worn couch, a coffee machine that barely worked but clean. A single photograph sat on his nightstand. 4 men in uniform, arms over each other's shoulders, grinning under the blinding sun of Kandahar. 2 of them were gone now. The third, Jonashad, survived, but lost both legs to a roadside bomb. Noah's hand hovered over the picture frame before he turned it face down. He had never talked about the war. Not to neighbors, not to therapists, not to his parents back in Oregon, who had stopped asking years ago. But now, sitting in the dark with only the hum of the refrigerator in the background, he felt the weight of it pressing in from all sides. It was around midnight when his phone vibrated with a message from Elaine. "He's restless, whining in his sleep. Might help if he sees you." Noah didn't hesitate. When he arrived at the clinic, Ambertha receptionist had already locked up for the night. Elaine let him in through the back, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't ask questions, just led him down the hall to the recovery room. Chance lay curled up on a blanket, his body still thin, but his eyes more alert now. He lifted his head slightly when Noah entered, tail thumping once against the floor. "He hasn't stopped watching the door since sunset," Elaine whispered with a tired smile. "I think he knows who pulled the dirt." Noah crouched beside him, gently scratching behind his ear. "You and me both, buddy," he murmured. Elaine handed him a folded sleeping mat. "Stay as long as you need. You're not the only one carrying ghosts in here." She closed the door behind her, and for a while the only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the occasional gust of wind tapping against the window. Noah laid the mat beside Chance and stretched out on his side, folding his arm under his head. His body ached, but his mind wouldn't settle. Images rose uninvited. A sandstorm swallowing an outpost, the weight of a friend's last breath in his lap, the ringing silence after the blast. He closed his eyes, but the darkness offered no relief. Chance stirred, sensing the shift. With effort, the pup dragged himself closer, his bony frame pressing against Noah's chest. Noah didn't move. A moment later, he felt the dog's shallow breathing steady against him, warm and real. "I don't sleep much," he whispered into the quiet. "Hasn't been real sleep in years." Chance let out a small sigh and nudged his nose under Noah's arm, anchoring himself. Sometime before dawn, Noah drifted off not into the usual jagged dreams, but into something gentler. When he woke, Chance was still nestled beside him, one paw draped lightly over his wrist. Later that day, Elaine stepped into the room with a clipboard. Her expression was businesslike, but her eyes softened when she saw the 2 of them together. "He's strong enough to leave the clinic," she said. Not fully recovered but stable. He'll need round-the-clock care, warmth, gentle food, no stress. Noah sat up, his back stiff from the floor. "I'll take him." Elaine looked at him for a long moment. "You sure? It's not just the dog who needs healing, Noah." "I know," he said simply. "That's why we need each other." She nodded. "Then I'll sign the discharge. But bring him back if anything changes. And no tough guy routine. You don't get points for pretending you're fine." "I haven't been fine in years," he admitted, a faint, dry smile playing at his lips. "But I'm trying." Lila Bennett stood behind the living room window, her fingers pressed against the glass. 3 houses down, Noah Carter laughed as a golden Labrador puppy bounded clumsily across his front yard. Chance, the new puppy, was a recent addition to Noah's home, and his bright energy seemed to ripple through the yard. Lila's brown eyes followed every leap and tumble, wide with a mix of longing and delight. She did not speak or call out. At 9 years old, she had learned to keep her joys and sorrows quiet. Since the car accident 2 years ago that took her father's life, not a single word had passed Lila's lips. The trauma had settled deep, sealing her voice away and leaving her world muffled. In the afternoons after school, while other children played outside, Lila stayed inside, watching seasons change through the glass. But today, as she watched Chance play, something stirred inside her that she hadn't felt in a long time, a tiny spark of curiosity and happiness. Chance rolled in the grass, tugging at an old knotted rope toy that Noah had tossed around. Lila's lips parted in a silent gasp when the puppy suddenly looked her way. She ducked behind the curtain. After a moment, she peeked out again. Noah had gone inside, leaving Chance to explore the yard on his own. Summoning a tremor of bravery, Lila slipped away from the window and tiptoed to her bedroom. Her gaze landed on a small plush rabbit with one button eye, missing her old favorite toy from before the accident, one she hadn't touched in ages but that still held the warmth of happier times. Cradling the rabbit to her chest, she crept out the front door. Outside, the late afternoon air was mild and smelled of freshly cut grass. Lila's heart pounded as she crept down the sidewalk. Even the scuff of her sneakers on concrete sounded too loud in her ears. As she neared Noah Carter's yard, she could hear Chance's soft yips as he chased a butterfly. With gentle hands, she reached through a gap in the fence and set the plush rabbit on the grass, as quietly as a whisper. The puppy's ears perked up at the movement. Before Chance could spot her, Lila turned and hurried back home. Once safely behind her own gate, Lila paused to glance back. Chance had trotted over to investigate the mysterious new toy. The little dog sniffed the rabbit, then picked it up in his mouth, tail wagging furiously. Watching him play with her gift, Lila felt a shy smile tug at the corners of her mouth. It was a small smile, unseen by anyone, but it was real. In the silence, Lila felt a connection spark to life. She lingered a few seconds longer, hands clasped tight, savoring the simple joy of seeing Chance happy with her offering. That evening, long after sunset and after Chance was back inside, Sarah Bennett trudged up her front steps. Sarah, in her late 30s, was tall and willowy with dark blonde hair, and she looked as tired as she felt. She had just finished a 10-hour waitressing shift at the Silver Diner, and her feet ached in her worn sneakers. Juggling trays and fake smiles all day had drained her, but not nearly as much as the constant worry for Lila. Grief sometimes made her seem distant, but her love for her daughter never faltered. Even on days when Sarah felt she had nothing left to give, she tried her best for Lila. Inside, the house was dim and silent. Sarah hung up her jacket and tiptoed down the hallway to Lila's room. She found Lila fast asleep, curled on her side under a patchwork quilt. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Sarah saw that Lila's face looked more peaceful than usual, a faint contentment smoothing her brow. Gently, she brushed a few strands of hair off Lila's forehead. Sarah's chest tightened with a familiar ache as she remembered how, 2 years ago, her husband would have been there to kiss Lila goodnight. The memory of that shattered night, the screech of tires, the crunch of metal flashed through her mind. She closed her eyes, forcing it away. That tragedy had stolen so much from them both. Sarah sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Lila instinctively snuggled closer to her mother's warmth, though she didn't wake. Sarah noticed something missing from Lila's shelf, the little one-eyed rabbit she used to carry everywhere. It was gone, leaving an empty space among her other stuffed animals. Sarah wondered about this. Lila rarely touched those old toys anymore. Perhaps Lila had simply misplaced it. Making a mental note to search for the rabbit later, Sarah leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her daughter's temple. Just then, a muffled bark sounded down the street. Chance's playful yip, unmistakable even at this hour. Lila stirred, her eyes moving beneath her eyelids, but she didn't wake. As Lila settled back into sleep, a faint smile touched Sarah's lips. She recalled how, earlier in the week, the new puppy had tugged on its leash as Noah Carter walked by. For the first time in ages, she'd seen Lila at the window that afternoon, eyes bright as she watched the dog's antics. It had been a fleeting glimpse, but Sarah had seen a light in her daughter's face that she had thought lost forever. As Sarah rose to leave, she allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe this lovable puppy named Chance was exactly that, a chance for Lila to feel something good again, and for both of them to heal a little. In the doorway, Sarah paused and looked back at her sleeping child. "We'll be okay," she whispered into the hush of the room, a promise and a prayer all in one. And though Lila didn't hear it, in her dreams she held that hope close, quiet, and soft as a heartbeat. The mornings in Amado had begun to soften. The blazing July sun gave way to gentler August light, casting long amber streaks through Noah's kitchen window as Chance lay curled on an old quilt beside the door. A light breeze teased the edge of the curtain, and for the first time since moving in, the little house felt less like a shelter and more like a home. Noah Carter sat at the table, sipping black coffee, his eyes never drifting far from the pup at his feet. Chance was healing slowly, stubbornly, but with visible progress. His fur had begun to fill out, a deeper honey gold, now that the matted dirt and dried blood had been gently washed away. The hollow around his ribs had softened, and though he remained underweight, his legs no longer trembled constantly when he stood. He was still quiet, never barking, but his eyes tracked everything with a bright, alert curiosity that had been absent in those first days. Noah had fallen into a rhythm, early walks at sunrise to avoid the heat, hand-feeding Chance soft meals, massaging the puppy's legs as instructed by Elaine, and in the spaces between, fixing things he hadn't touched in years. The porch railing was no longer crooked. The backyard, once overrun by tall weeds and dry debris, was slowly being cleared. He'd even put up a new mailbox post after the old one had leaned too far into the neighbor's cactus patch. It was on one of these quiet mornings, as Noah pulled weeds near the back fence, that it happened. Chance had been lounging nearby on a blanket, blinking lazily in the sun, but something, a sound, a smell, a flicker of memory made his ears perk up. He stood shakily, legs trembling, then shifted one paw forward. His body wobbled but didn't collapse. Another step, then a third. Noah turned just in time to see Chance, truly walking without help. It was barely 6 feet. Every step was labored and unsteady. But when Chance reached the edge of the patio, he paused, looked back over his shoulder, and let his tail thump twice against the air before sinking slowly back to the ground. Noah's throat tightened. He dropped the rake and crouched beside the pup, pressing his forehead gently to Chance's. "That's it, buddy," he whispered. "That's how we fight." It wasn't just Chance who was changing. Noah had started taking short drives again, not just to the clinic or the feed store, but around the edges of town. He waved to neighbors, stopped once at the farmer's market. One afternoon, he even wandered into the library, a small brick building with peeling paint and surprisingly fast Wi-Fi. There, he met Mara Linwood, the librariana woman in her 60s with sharp silver hair, turquoise earrings, and a habit of organizing books by theme instead of title. She had a sharp tongue but a warm gaze, and she raised an eyebrow when she saw him in the dog training section. "For yourself or the dog?" she asked, without looking up from her cart. Noah smiled, the first genuine one he'd felt that day. "Little of both, maybe," she snorted. "Best training always goes both ways. Books over there. Gentle commands for trauma. Rescued dogs. Good luck, soldier." He paused. "How did you know I was military? Your back's too straight and your eyes give away nothing. That's not normal posture for someone buying milk and dog biscuits." He chuckled. "Fair enough." Mara became an unexpected presence in his weekly rhythm. She never pried, but she noticed things, asked questions he didn't hate answering. She also started saving old blankets from the donation bin for Chance, leaving them on the desk with notes like, "For the recruit." Back at home, Chance's confidence was growing. He still flinched at sudden sounds, especially metal clanging or loud footsteps, but he no longer cowered at every movement. One afternoon, while Noah was hammering new fence boards, Chance trotted from the patio to the shade tree all on his own. No encouragement, no reward, just quiet determination. Lila noticed. She had been watching from her window again. Every morning now, she left a small token by the fence, sometimes a cookie, other times a pine cone, once a drawing of Chance she'd made in blue crayon. The pup had begun to recognize her scent. His ears would perk the moment she appeared, and he'd limp to the fence with an eager tail wag. On the 5th day, Lila didn't run. She stayed by the fence, kneeling quietly, one hand resting on the slats. Chance approached, slowly but without hesitation. When his wet nose touched her fingers, Lila didn't pull away. Her small fingers curled slightly, stroking his fur. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came, just a long, steady breath. Inside her house, Sarah watched from behind the curtain. Her heart ached at the sight, equal parts joy and sorrow. She hadn't seen Lila reach out like that to anyone in years. And though she still carried the sharp edges of grief, something inside her softened as she watched the scene unfold. That evening, Noah found a folded note tucked into the crook of the fence post. It was written in careful, blocky letters. "His name is Chance. Mine is Lila. Thank you for him." He stared at the note for a long time before tucking it into his back pocket. Later that night, as he sat beside Chance under the stars, Noah whispered, "Looks like you've made a friend." Chance, lying with his head on Noah's boot, let out a low-content sigh. The sun had barely crested the hills east of Amado when Dr. Elaine Foster arrived at her clinic, balancing a to-go coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other. The folder was older than most of the files she handled these days, its edges frayed, the handwriting on the front faded and uneven. She had spent half the night combing through archived veterinary records from a shared government network she still had limited access to, thanks to a short contract she'd held years ago with the Department of Defense. It had been a long shot, digging into an obscure canine training program that had quietly dissolved nearly 3 years ago. But then she found it a familiar tattoo number, faintly scrawled in the corner of a forgotten intake form. She sat behind her desk, the folder spread open in front of her, and reread the evaluation. Subject 427, male Labrador, approx. 10 weeks. Behavioral flags: lacks defensive response, non-aggressive during forced stimulation, fails bite initiation protocol. Recommend removal from program. Stamped across the bottom in red ink was a word that lingered like a bruise: culled. Elaine's jaw clenched. The file didn't list a name, didn't list a handler, just an entry date, a code, and a location: Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio. The date matched what she had estimated for Chance's age. Her fingers curled tightly around the page. There was no record of adoption, no documentation of transport, just a quiet erasure, like he'd never existed. She reached for her phone and texted Noah, "Need to see you. Come in today if you can. It's about Chance." By noon, Noah was seated across from her in the small office, Chance lying obediently at his feet. The pup had gained weight over the last week and now stood taller, his coat fuller. Though still cautious around new people, he was alert and calm in Elaine's presence, resting his head on Noah's boot as if to signal his trust. Elaine slid the folder across the desk. "I found him," she said simply. Noah opened the file, eyes scanning the sparse notes. When he reached the stamped word, he didn't speak for a long time. "They were going to kill him?" he finally asked, voice low. Elaine nodded. "That's what culled usually means in military breeding programs. No formal euthanasia record. No adoption trail. He was removed from the official roster, quietly." "But why?" She leaned back, sighing. "Because he failed the wrong test. He didn't respond to pain with aggression, didn't bite under pressure. They saw that as a flaw meant he couldn't be trusted in combat or security scenarios." Noah looked down at Chance, whose tail flicked once in his sleep. "And yet they tattooed him, labeled him early." Elaine nodded. "Some contractors mark pups at 8 weeks. Too early to judge anything meaningful, but once you're in the system, you either pass or you disappear." Noah closed the file. "He's not a flaw. He's the reason I'm still breathing in the morning." Elaine's voice softened. "I know." Outside the clinic, as Noah clipped Chance's leash and walked slowly back to the truck, his mind raced. The Army had taught him about acceptable losses, about classifications and decisions made in boardrooms by people who never saw what those choices did on the ground. But this wasn't just about one dog. It was about a life that had been dismissed for being too gentle. That evening, back home, Noah sat on the porch while Chance gnawed contentedly on a braided rope toy. The light of the sunset painted the sky in deep crimson streaks. He pulled the manila folder from the passenger seat and stared at it again. Later, when Sarah Bennett walked by with a grocery bag in each hand, she paused at the gate. Her posture was always proud but worn, like a dancer who'd learned to carry sorrow without letting it ruin her balance. She was dressed in black slacks and a faded blouse, her blonde hair loosely tied back. The tired lines around her mouth had deepened lately, but she managed a small smile when she saw Chance chase a butterfly into a lazy tumble. "Getting stronger," she said. "Every day," Noah replied. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Lila talks about him all the time, not out loud, but in notes, drawings. Her teachers say she's been more focused, happier." Noah looked up, something gentle in his expression. "I think they're healing each other." Sarah nodded. "Maybe we all are, one piece at a time." That night, as Noah lit a small lamp beside the couch and read from a dog training manual borrowed from Mara, Chance climbed up beside him and settled with his head in Noah's lap. His breathing was steady, his body relaxed, but something in the silence still weighed heavy. Noah rested his hand on the pup's shoulder. "You weren't broken," he said. "They just didn't know what you were made for." Chance didn't respond, but in the slow rise and fall of his chest, in the warmth of his presence, Noah felt something shift, a sense of purpose, or maybe the first stirring of resolve. This wasn't over. If someone had tried to bury this dog's life like a mistake, they hadn't counted on what would grow from the dirt. By late afternoon, the air in Amado had changed. It wasn't just the drop in temperature or the sudden stillness in the trees. It was the weight of it, the kind of pressure that built behind the eyes and warned animals long before people took notice. Birds had gone quiet. The desert wind, usually dry and impatient, now carried moisture thick as breath. Dark clouds gathered low in the sky, rolling over the hills like an army marching toward the town. Noah Carter stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching the sky darken. Chance was at his side, sitting more upright than usual, his ears pricked and body tense. The dog had been uneasy all afternoon, pacing between the front door and the window, letting out soft, anxious whines. "Storm's close," Noah muttered. "You feel it too, huh?" Inside, he grabbed the emergency lanterns and checked the old generator in the shed. It sputtered but came to life with a reluctant roar. Chance didn't leave his side. Every creak, every gust of wind set the dog on alert, as if instincts long buried were now wide awake. 3 houses down, Sarah Bennett closed all the windows in her kitchen and unplugged the coffee machine. She glanced down the hall at Lila's bedroom, where her daughter sat on the floor with a colored pencil in hand, sketching what looked like a dog beneath a tree. "Sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "storm's coming. Stay inside, okay?" Lila nodded, but didn't look up. She'd drawn that same image 3 times in the last week. A dog, always Chance, always near a tree. Sarah lingered a moment longer before heading to the laundry room to secure the back door. But when she returned, Lila was gone. Outside, the wind had turned. Dust curled in the air, and thunder cracked far too close for comfort. Noah was setting water bowls inside when he heard Ita Child's cry, sharp and panicked, swept in on the wind. Chance bolted toward the gate, barking for the first time since Noah had known him. Not a scared bark, but a call, urgent, focused. Noah's heart seized. "Lila?" he shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. He didn't wait. Chance had already pushed through the half-open gate and darted toward the far end of the neighborhood where a twisted grove of old mesquite trees lined the edge of a dried-up wash. Noah followed, rain beginning to pelt down in thick, angry drops. They found her near the base of a leaning oak, one hand gripping a broken fence post, the other shielding her head from the debris flying through the air. A large branch had snapped from above and pinned part of her leg beneath it. She wasn't hurt badly, but she was trapped and terrified. Chance reached her first. Without hesitation, he crawled under the tangle of limbs and laid his body over hers, not in panic, in protection. When Noah arrived, soaked and breathless, he dropped to his knees beside them. "Hey, I got you," he said, voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "You're okay now." With careful hands, he pulled the branch back enough for Lila to crawl free. She clung to Chance, who stayed absolutely still, his body acting as a buffer between her and the chaos around them. Thunder boomed. The storm grew louder. Noah scooped Lila into his arms while Chance ran beside them. They stumbled home through rising mud and stinging rain, boots sliding in the runoff, clothes heavy with water. Sarah was already outside, screaming her daughter's name when she saw them. She dropped to her knees on the porch, arms outstretched as Noah passed Lila into her grasp. The little girl buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her body shaking not from cold but from shock. Sarah looked up at Noah with tears mixing into the rain on her face. "Thank you," she breathed. Then to Chance, who stood close, mud splattered, but head high. "And you." That night, the power was out across most of Amado. The wind finally died after midnight, leaving behind a landscape of broken limbs and bent fences. Inside Noah's home, Chance slept beside the fire. His body was still tense from the adrenaline, but his breathing was deep. Lila, wrapped in a dry blanket, sat next to him. She hadn't spoken, but her hand stayed on his back, steady and certain. Sarah sat nearby, sipping tea with trembling hands. "She was looking for him," she whispered to Noah. "When she saw the storm, she ran out. She was scared he'd be alone." Noah stared into the fire. He would have gone looking for her too. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Inside, Something had shifted. 3 days after the storm, the town of Amado was still picking up branches, resetting fences, and patching roofs. The desert sun had returned, unapologetically bright, as if the flood and fury of wind had been just a bad dream. But for the Bennett family and Noah Carter, something had changed permanently beneath the calm surface. Sarah sat on the porch steps of her house, her long legs folded beneath her and a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose braid, and dark circles under her eyes hinted at many sleepless nights not from fear anymore, but from something closer to gratitude. Lila sat beside her, barefoot and still in pajamas, sketching with focused concentration. On the page, Chance was drawn again, this time beneath a large oak tree, standing protectively over a smaller figure. Sarah looked down at the image, then at her daughter. "You want people to see this one?" Lila nodded once, firm. So Sarah took the drawing, snapped a photo with her phone, and hesitated only a moment before typing out a caption. "This is Chance, the dog who saved my daughter's life, and who, in many ways, gave it back to her. We don't need words to tell you what he means to us." She hit post. Within hours, the story was being shared. The photo, simple and childlike, was enough to stop strangers mid-scroll. By evening, her inbox was flooded with messages. Friends, old co-workers, people she hadn't spoken to in years, all moved by the quiet strength of the tale. People asked questions. Some offered prayers. A few even asked if they could send toys for the dog. The next day, a local news van from Tucson rolled up outside Noah's gate. The reporter was Janessa Torres, a sharp, energetic woman in her mid-30s with expressive dark eyes and a direct but warm manner. She wore jeans and a rust-colored blazer, her long black hair tied neatly at her nape. She greeted Noah with an easy handshake. "Mr. Carter, I hope I'm not intruding. We'd love to do a short segment about Chance, especially after that viral post. Just a few questions, nothing invasive." Noah shifted on his porch, glancing at Chance, who lay calmly under a patch of shade. "I'm not usually one for camera," he said. Janessa smiled. "It's not really about you. It's about him, and the little girl who drew that picture." Noah hesitated, then nodded. "All right, one interview." The segment was short, just under 3 minutes. Janessa was respectful, letting the story speak for itself. She filmed Chance walking carefully across the yard, the scar on his leg still faintly visible beneath his golden fur. She asked about the rescue, about the storm, about what made Noah stop that day on the highway. When he told her, quietly and plainly, about the vultures circling a dying pup, she didn't interrupt. She just let the silence linger. "Why do you think he's still here?" she asked. Noah looked at Chance. "Because he wasn't done yet." By the time the story aired, it had been picked up by a national affiliate, then a human interest podcast, then a military blog that tracked former service animals. Before long, people began digging deeper, and that's when someone found the code. The photo of Chance's inner thigh of the small tattoo surfaced on a K9 handlers forum. It wasn't long before Captain Elias Moore, now head of Special Canine Deployment Programs out of San Antonio, reached out to Noah directly. Moore was in his late 50s, tall and rigid, with graying temples and a voice like gravel. He had the weight of someone who carried both authority and remorse. When he met Noah outside the Amado diner, he came alone, no press, no handlers. "I had to see him with my own eyes," Moore said, adjusting his sunglasses. "That tattoo, I remember the batch. 3 pups bred for a special trial group. 2 passed. The 3rd disappeared from the records. We assumed he'd been dealt with." "He wasn't," Noah said. "He was thrown out like trash." Moore nodded slowly, and still he survived. They stood in silence for a long time, before Moore finally added, If you want to file a formal complaint, I'll back it. Quietly or publicly. Whatever you decide." Noah thought about it. "What I want," he said, "is for people like him to stop being seen as broken when they're just built different." That night, back at home, Noah sat with Chance under the stars. The dog's head rested on his lap, eyes half closed. A wind moved gently through the trees, bending but not breaking them. Across town, Sarah scrolled through a message from a foundation offering therapy dogs for children with trauma. The note ended with a line, "Your daughter's story has already given hope to others." She looked over at Lila, asleep on the couch, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The next morning, the mail arrived in a cardboard box covered with stickers. Inside was a new blue collar for Chance, embroidered with a single word, "Survivor." The desert was quiet in that golden hour between late afternoon and dusk, when the sun stretched low over the horizon and turned the hills into silhouettes. At the edge of Noah Carter's modest yard, wind chimes made from salvaged tin and copper whispered their soft metallic songs. The air smelled of sage and sun-warmed wood, and somewhere nearby, cicadas sang their slow hymn to the coming night. Chance lay in the grass near the front porch, his new blue collar catching the sunlight in a gentle gleam. The word "Survivor," embroidered in white thread, stood out against his honey-gold fur. He had grown stronger, no longer bony, no longer hesitant. His steps were sure now, his gaze steady. But even more than that, he had changed the people around him, like a ripple softening the hardest stone. Inside the house, Lila sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room, crayons scattered around her. She was working on another drawing, tongue slightly sticking out, eyes narrowed with concentration. This one showed her Chance and a third figure, a man with a beard and strong shoulders, Noah. The three of them stood under a big tree, and above them, a bright yellow sun smiled down from the corner of the page. Sarah stood in the kitchen watching them, arms folded, a faint, incredulous smile tugging at her lips. In the weeks since the storm, her daughter had come back to life in pieces, first through pictures, then gestures, then quiet laughter, but not words, not yet. That changed on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks later. The morning was soft, the sky wrapped in gray mist. Noah had stopped by to drop off a bag of dog biscuits Lila had picked out herself. He knocked once, but before Sarah could reach the door, it creaked open from within. And there was Lila, barefoot, holding Chance's leash. "Come on, Chance," she said. 2 small words, clear, shy, but loud enough to shake the earth beneath Sarah's feet. The bag slipped from Noah's hands. Sarah gasped, tears already filling her eyes. Noah stared at the girl in the doorway. "Did she just say something?" Sarah breathed. "Yes?" Lila looked up at them both, then down at Chance, who sat patiently beside her. She knelt, hugged the dog tightly, and said again softly, "Thank you, Chance." Noah turned away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. But it was too late. They'd already seen. That night, the three of them, Lila, Sarah, and Noah, sat on the back porch under the stars. Chance dozed between them, his body finally at peace, as if hearing those words had fulfilled a sacred duty he hadn't known he carried. "I didn't know she had it in her," Sarah whispered, eyes still wide with wonder. "She just needed time," Noah said, voice thick. "And something or someone to remind her it was safe again." Sarah looked at him, really looked this time. "You needed that too." Noah smiled, faint but honest. "I did." In the weeks that followed, Noah filled out the last of the adoption paperwork. Chance was officially his now, not just in heart but by law. Dr. Elaine Foster signed off on the health clearance. Mara, at the library, insisted on hosting a little celebration in the reading room, complete with dog-shaped cookies and a cardboard medal that read "Honorary Hero." But Noah wanted more for Chance than a title. He had begun visiting the local VA hospital, where a small group of veterans met weekly to share coffee, silence, and occasionally memories. They were mostly older men, some in wheelchairs, others leaning heavily on canes. A few wore faded caps with service branch logos. They didn't speak much to strangers. But when Noah brought Chance in for the first time, something changed. A man named Royce Hernandez, a Vietnam vet with haunted eyes and a silver beard, was the first to reach out. He offered Chance a treat. The dog took it gently, then lay at Royce's feet without a command. Royce stared down, then up at Noah. "He knows," he said. "He's been where we've been." It became a regular thing. Chance would visit the hospital twice a week, lying beside men who hadn't slept through the night in years. His presence slowed their breathing, steadied their nerves. He didn't bark, he didn't demand. He just existed fully, quietly, in that way animals do when they understand that presence itself is a kind of healing. One afternoon, a younger veteran barely out of his 20s approached Noah in the hallway. His arms bore fresh scars, the kind born not of combat, but what came after. "He sat with me for 20 minutes, the man said. "Didn't even move. I hadn't felt calm in months." Noah nodded. "That's what he does." "What is he?" the man asked, still blinking in disbelief. And Noah, with no hesitation, replied, "He's light, that's all. He just finds the ones who've forgotten how to see it." Back in Amado, Lila returned to school. She didn't talk much, but she spoke when it mattered. One day, during show and tell, she brought a photo of Chance and stood in front of the class. Her voice shook, but she got through it. "This is Chance," she said. "He saved me, so I could come back." At home that evening, Sarah made dinner while humming something she hadn't done in years. Noah brought over groceries without asking. Chance curled up in his usual spot near the porch swing, where the sun always hit just right. Somewhere, a chime stirred in the wind, and in that moment, everything was quiet and nothing was broken.